What the US just did in Hormuz is stunning. Iran is now cornered after this. On the night of May 7th, 3 American destroyers entered the most dangerous stretch of water on the planet. The Revolutionary Guard was waiting. Drone swarms in the sky, fast attack boats racing across the waves, anti-ship missiles locked and ready. Tehran believed the trap was set, but within minutes, something happened that no one in Iran saw coming, and the consequences are still unfolding right now. So what exactly did the United States do? Welcome back to the Currency War, where serious viewers come for serious analysis of the stories shaping our world. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so the next briefing arrives the moment it is published. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from today. Every region brings its own perspective, and we read every single comment. Now settle in, because this is a story you will want to follow from beginning to end. For many months, the Strait of Hormuz had been treated by Iran as its most powerful card on the table. The narrow waterway carries a huge share of the world's oil. Whoever controls it controls a piece of the global economy. The Revolutionary Guard had built its entire strategy around this idea. Fast attack boats patrolled the waters day and night. Drone units stayed on standby along the coast. Hidden missile positions watched every ship that passed through. Every vessel was tracked. Every movement was logged. Even ships belonging to the United States Navy were not exempt. Iran believed this surveillance gave it real power during the fragile ceasefire talks that had been unfolding across the region. Then came the night of May 7th. Tensions across the Middle East were climbing fast, and the United States Navy made a move that changed the entire temperature of the crisis. 3 guided missile destroyers entered the strait in a clear formation. The USS Truxtun, which had sailed from its base in Norfolk, led the group. Behind it came the USS Rafael Peralta. The third ship, the USS Mason, carried the heaviest air defense capability of the 3. All 3 vessels were combat ready. All 3 carried advanced layered defense systems, and all 3 were cutting through the waves with a clear purpose as they moved toward the Gulf of Oman. What happened next was a moment Iran had clearly prepared for. As the American formation moved deeper into the corridor, hidden launch positions along the Iranian coast suddenly came to life. According to later statements from U.S. Central Command, the Revolutionary Guard had viewed the transit of the destroyers as an opportunity. An asymmetric ambush was set into motion. The plan was simple on paper. Overwhelm the American ships with cheap weapons fired from many directions at once. Anti-ship projectiles were launched from coastal positions. The sky above the strait began to fill with Iranian drones descending toward the destroyers. And on the surface of the water, small fast boats began racing toward the American formation in a tight swarm. The picture from above would have looked like a hive of insects moving in on a single target. The doctrine inside the Revolutionary Guard had always been the same: hit billion-dollar warships with cheap drones and missiles, create chaos, force a mistake. But what Tehran expected and what actually happened were 2 very different things. The American destroyers had been built precisely for this kind of layered attack. The close-in weapon systems activated within seconds, engaging the incoming drones one after another. Standard interceptor missiles locked onto aerial targets across multiple directions. The fast attack boats that had hoped to reach the ships were neutralized on the water before they could close the distance. Then MH-60 Seahawk helicopters lifted off from the decks of the destroyers in quick succession. These helicopters carried air-to-surface weapons and engaged the remaining threats at their point of origin, along the Iranian coastline. The entire engagement, both in the air and on the sea, was over in a matter of minutes. According to the official Pentagon reporting that followed, not one of the 3 American destroyers sustained even minor damage. The drones that had been launched with such confidence by Iranian operators fell into the water one after another. President Trump later spoke about the moment in his own distinctive style. He compared the descent of the drones into the sea to a kind of natural rainfall. The image was striking. The message was even sharper. But this entire engagement, dramatic as it was, turned out to be only the opening act. The serious American response had not yet begun. As darkness settled over the Gulf that night, a deeper sound began to fill the sky. The roar of fighter jet engines, the hum of refueling aircraft, the quiet movement of a much larger operation getting into position. Because what the United States was about to do in the hours that followed would reshape Iran's military position in the Gulf in a single night. And the world was about to learn that the rules of this confrontation had just changed for good. The hours that followed the failed Iranian ambush were not a routine response. What unfolded across the Gulf that night was a full-scale precision air operation, and the level of coordination behind it told a clear story. This had been planned long before the destroyers ever entered the strait. The order, according to multiple reports, came directly from U.S. Central Command headquarters. The targets had been mapped weeks in advance. The intelligence had been gathered piece by piece, and the timeline had been waiting for the right trigger. Iran's ambush provided that trigger. Behind this operation stood a logistical network of extraordinary size. the kind of operation the world rarely sees unfold in real time. Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates served as the operational heart of the mission. From this base, more than 5 aerial refueling aircraft lifted off almost at the same moment. Massive stratotanker platforms began circling in long, looping orbits high above the Gulf. Military analysts describe this kind of formation as a fuel bridge in the sky. It is the backbone that allows fighter jets to remain over their targets for hours rather than minutes. Without this bridge, no extended precision campaign of this scale would be possible. With it, the United States effectively owned the airspace above the strait. The story turns to the carriers. The USS George H.W. Bush, which had been patrolling the Gulf waters, launched its aircraft into the night sky. The USS Abraham Lincoln, positioned in a supporting role nearby, was ready to surge additional sorties if needed. Together, these 2 carriers provided the strike packages that would do the actual work over Iranian targets. The aircraft moved in waves. Each wave had a specific role. Stealth fighters moved first. They locked onto targets that had been identified by weeks of careful intelligence collection. Growler electronic warfare aircraft worked in parallel. Their job was to jam the Iranian air defense network so completely that operators on the ground saw only static. The Iranian radar grid, built up over years at enormous cost, was effectively blinded for the duration of the strike. Behind the stealth platforms came the Super Hornets. F-35 jets glided silently over the assigned target zones, invisible to the surviving Iranian sensors. According to some reports, A-10 Thunderbolt aircraft were also held in reserve in case low-altitude follow-up strikes were required. From the perspective of an Iranian commander watching events from a bunker on the coast, the situation must have looked impossible. No working radar, no coordinated response, no way to make sense of what was happening overhead. One detail in this operation deserves special attention. The United States stated very clearly that not a single American soldier was placed on Iranian soil during the entire mission. Every single target was struck by precision munitions fired from long range. The doctrine on display was cold, methodical, calculated. Use the air, use the sea, use overwhelming technological superiority, and finish the job before the other side can mount a real response. The official statement from U.S. Central Command came almost immediately after the strike packages returned safely to their carriers. The language chosen was deliberately precise. CENTCOM did not describe the operation as the start of a new war. Instead, the statement described the action as a defensive precision strike against military infrastructure that had directly threatened American warships sailing in international waters. The legal framing here matters more than it might appear at first glance. By describing the action this way, Washington placed the entire operation under the well-established right of self-defense recognized under international law. Iran had fired first, the American military had responded, civilian areas had been deliberately kept outside the kill zone. The legal record was clean. President Trump's own statement, delivered on social media in his unmistakable style, pushed the message further. He spoke about watching Iranian drones fall into the sea with a tone that mixed satisfaction and warning in equal measure. The substance of the message was unmissable. If a final agreement was not reached quickly, the military pressure would not stop here. What had just happened, in other words, was only the opening move. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt reinforced the same message in her own briefing. She made it clear that if Iran failed to take the situation seriously, further significant consequences could follow. The words were calm. The meaning was sharp. The night was not over. The strategic targets along the Iranian coast were still to come, and the world was about to see exactly which pillars of Iran's power were chosen for destruction. By the morning after the strike, one question dominated every serious conversation inside defense circles. Were the targets chosen by the United States picked at random? Or did they form a deliberate map designed to break the very spine of Iran's defensive doctrine in the Gulf? The evidence pointed firmly to the second answer. The targets were not scattered. They were the load-bearing pillars of the entire Revolutionary Guard system along the strait, and each of those pillars carried decades of investment, planning, and strategic meaning. The first target was Bandar Abbas. This is not simply a coastal city on a map. Bandar Abbas serves as the main headquarters of the Iranian Navy. It is the city from which the larger Iranian frigates, including the Jamaran and the Sahand, are commanded. It is also the same naval establishment that, according to multiple credible accounts, had already lost close to 150 vessels in earlier rounds of conflict. Inside the Revolutionary Guard itself, Bandar Abbas was understood as the heart of Hormuz. Every meaningful naval operation in the strait was coordinated from this location. According to the reporting that followed, American munitions reportedly neutralized logistical depots, command centers, missile batteries, and the radar network that fed targeting data to the entire coastal defense system. The coastal anti-ship missile launch ramps were rendered inoperable. The hidden silos for older Silkworm and Sunburn family missiles were also targeted. In a matter of seconds, the network that had taken decades to build was put out of commission. On the operational side, the second target may have been the most consequential of all. Qeshm Island is the largest island in the Gulf. It covers roughly 1,445 square kilometers. To the outside world, Qeshm has long been marketed as a tourist destination, complete with free trade zones and beaches. To the Revolutionary Guard, the island had become something very different. Beneath the surface of Qeshm sits one of the most ambitious underground missile complexes ever built in the region. Kilometers of concrete tunnels run beneath the rock. Inside those tunnels are missile arsenals, drone launch ramps, and hardened command nodes. The Iranian military had effectively turned Qeshm into a stationary aircraft carrier anchored at the mouth of the strait. According to the reports that emerged, the strike targeted launch ramps for Shahid 136 kamikaze drones, the hidden silos of Ghadir and Nasser-1 anti-ship missiles, and the underground passages from which College Far's ballistic missiles could be fired at moving naval targets. Precision-guided munitions sealed the entrances of these tunnels with pinpoint accuracy. The plug of the strait, as Qeshm had been described inside Iranian military doctrine, was no longer functioning as a plug. The third target was newer, and in some ways, the most strategically painful for Tehran. The Sirik region, where the Shahid Bahari naval base opened in 2020, served as the eastern gateway of the Revolutionary Guard's maritime reach. Every ship approaching the strait from the Gulf of Oman was first picked up by the radars based here. This was the early warning ear of the entire Iranian defensive system. The intelligence nodes, the surveillance feeds, and the coastal defense systems were most densely concentrated at this single location. In the latest American strike, those coastal defense systems and radar nodes were targeted one by one. The most vital links in the asymmetric chain were severed in a single night. Iran's surveillance posture over Hormuz was effectively erased. The wider implications of these strikes reach far beyond Iran's borders. These are the waters through which roughly 20% of the world's petroleum trade flows every single day. Any disruption here sends shockwaves through every economy that depends on stable energy prices. Tanker insurance premiums have already climbed sharply in the days following the strike. Global shipping lines are quietly reviewing their routes. Japan's energy security exposure has become a topic of urgent conversation in Tokyo. China's bypass routes through Central Asia have suddenly gained new strategic weight. Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline, which can move oil around Hormuz entirely, has been revalued by every serious analyst tracking the situation. The political picture is just as complex. Inside Washington, the strike has been framed as a measured act of self-defense. Inside Tehran, state media has tried to describe the explosions as routine air defense exercises, though the evidence on the ground tells a very different story. Inside the Gulf capitals, the reaction has been quieter, but no less significant. New sanctions drafts are reportedly circulating in the corridors of the United Nations. The diplomatic landscape is shifting faster than the military one. What happened inside the Iranian leadership in the hours after the strike was, by multiple accounts, something close to genuine panic. Commanders along the coast lost communication with their command centers in the opening moments of the operation. Decision-makers in Tehran were, in the most literal sense, flying blind. They could not see what had been hit. They could not see what was still standing. They could not see whether a second wave was coming. And in that fog of confusion, the first reactions inside the Iranian regime were not strategic. They were emotional. There was an early belief inside parts of the Iranian leadership that the massive explosions along the coast might have come not from the United States, but from the United Arab Emirates. The reason was both psychological and logical. Only days earlier, on May 4th and 5th, the UAE itself had experienced a major missile event. 12 ballistic missiles, 3 cruise missiles, and a large number of drones had reportedly impacted Emirati territory. Significant disruption was recorded in the Fujairah industrial zone, including fires in the petroleum infrastructure area. The episode had drawn international attention. Iran had publicly denied any involvement and called the allegations baseless. But inside Tehran, there was clearly a fear that the UAE might now be retaliating through quiet channels. The Emirati Defense Ministry watched the events of May 7th in complete silence. And when the flames along the Iranian coast finally began to die down, the truth became unmistakable. The power that had just struck them was the United States Navy itself. Behind the scenes, the diplomatic chessboard was moving even faster than the military one. Diplomatic traffic between Washington and Tehran had never really stopped since the start of the crisis. A temporary ceasefire reached in April had created a brief window of negotiation. According to reports that emerged later, Tehran had brought a 14-point plan to the table during that window. The demands inside that plan were, by any reasonable measure, extreme. Iran demanded the complete withdrawal of American forces from the region. It demanded war reparations running into the billions of dollars. It demanded the return of frozen assets held abroad. It even demanded a completely new governance system for the Strait of Hormuz, designed and controlled by Tehran itself. President Trump rejected the entire framework outright. The counteroffer from Washington was very different in tone and substance. Only days before the May 7th strike, the United States had presented Iran with a one-page memorandum of understanding. The document was reportedly delivered through Pakistani mediation. That single page was, in effect, the last honorable exit route available to Tehran. It outlined a 30-day negotiation process. It required the immediate reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. It demanded the full restraint of proxy networks and a hard cutoff of funding to militant groups across the region. It demanded the complete halt of the nuclear program. Tehran was still evaluating that document when the destroyers entered the strait. A final answer was reportedly expected within 24 hours. Pakistani diplomats were focused on the response that would come from Iran. The firing on the American destroyers changed the calculation entirely. Washington's retaliation was, in practice, an enforcement mechanism for the ceasefire offer that was already sitting on the table. So now the question turns to you, the viewer. Do you believe Iran will finally sit at the negotiating table, accept the terms presented through Pakistani mediation, and step back from a confrontation it can no longer win on the water? Or will the hardliners inside the Revolutionary Guard push Tehran toward a deeper confrontation, even after the events of May 7th? Drop your analysis in the comments below. Every comment is read carefully. Looking forward, the next 30 days will be the most important window in this entire crisis. Several deadlines now sit on the calendar at once: the expiration of the U.S. memorandum offer, the next scheduled meetings at the United Nations Security Council, the internal political pressure building inside Tehran, and the constant question of whether commercial shipping through the strait can be restored to anything resembling normal. For viewers who want to stay informed in a serious way, the advice is simple. Follow official statements from CENTCOM, the Pentagon, and the White House directly. Treat unverified social media claims with caution, and pay close attention to the price of crude oil, the cost of tanker insurance, and the movement of carrier strike groups in the region. These signals tell the real story long before the headlines catch up. This is a moment in history when the waters of a single narrow strait carry the weight of the global economy. What happens next will shape energy markets, diplomatic relationships, and the security of an entire region for years to come. Thank you for staying with the currency war until the very end. The story continues, and so will the analysis. Until the next briefing, stay informed, stay sharp, and stay one step ahead of the headlines.